This Fed Gov Today program is sponsored by CGI Federal. On this edition of Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose, a data revolution in the making at the Treasury Department, the modernization mission to fulfill the PMA, and the Navy's all-in on autonomy. Welcome to Fed Gov Today in Washington, D.C., on YouTube, and around the world on the American Forces Network. I'm Francis Rose. The federal government's about a year into Phase 2 of the implementation of the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act of 2018. One of the focuses of Phase 2 is meeting the law's requirements around agency data. David Ashley's the acting chief data officer at the Treasury Department. David, welcome. Thanks for joining me. It's great to have you here. You write about 5 points around data that kind of map out the way that the agency's going: governance, literacy, sharing, maturity, and cataloging. How did you and your colleagues decide those were the 5 things you wanted to focus on?
Well, Francis, thank you for having me. I appreciate being here. Well, the Evidence Act came out in 2018, signed really in January 2019. The second phase came out about a year or so ago, and really one of the key elements of that is governance. And governance is a big sort of umbrella term, and under that we've decided things like cataloging are very important. There's a new cataloging rule coming out to do at the end of this year. Data catalog, that's really where we identify all our data assets throughout the entire department. Treasury is a large federated organization of 100,000 folks and about 10 bureaus, so it's a pretty big organization. So the data cataloging effort is a very important piece of understanding what do we have, first of all, what data do we have and where is it kept. So data cataloging is a very important piece of that. Data maturity, trying to understand where we are in that data maturity life cycle. We're now moving a lot more into thinking about how to use AI, and that's another big piece of data maturity. We've completed a data maturity assessment of the bureaus. Each bureau completed that assessment, and we're reporting those out. So that's a big part of kind of understanding the where we are before we understand where we're going to go. And so the data maturity is very important. And data literacy has been a significant lift for the agency to better understand what people know and don't know. And so we've launched a data literacy campaign throughout the department. We've had great response so far from all the bureaus. So really trying to elevate the understanding in data literacy as well. All these things really together comprise what really are the spirit of the Evidence Act.
What did you learn from those assessments about each of those, I imagine silos is a fair word to describe them, that will help you break those silos and make data flow more freely across the department from bureau to bureau?
Well, breaking silos is part of the Executive Order 14243 President Trump signed recently, which is trying to break down data silos within the bureaus. So we do have data silos, as everybody has, because there are different mission sets within the bureaus. Everybody has the Treasury mission, but there's also missions related to what Bureau of Engraving and Printing is doing, what the IRS is doing, what Mint is doing, Bureau of the Fiscal Service. So trying to break down those silos. What we learned from our data maturity assessment is there are lots of different systems out there. Many of them are not connected, and many of them don't need to be connected, but we're really getting a sense of really where we should think about connecting data sets. And looking at data sharing as well, that's another big effort. Looking at data sharing and how we can connect data elements throughout the department to create that common story across the bureaus.
As you're doing that assessment, how much of what you see that will help you connect that data better has to do with the data itself, standards and so on? How much of it's infrastructure, with the way the infrastructure of the bureaus may be set up to communicate with each other, that kind of thing?
Well, it's both. You've got a very vast amount of highly varied data. And then we have lots of systems that don't speak. And so we're looking at doing things like APIs, application programming interfaces, to really better connect the data sets and make them more efficient. So looking at that, and as well as leveraging artificial intelligence across the department at different levels, is something that we're looking at, piloting some of those efforts as well to better connect the data sets. Some of our larger agencies, like the IRS, bureaus, the IRS, they've got a vast amount of data, and we talk about big data, big data, big data. Really, it's about what do we do with the data is now becoming really the main focus.
You told me before we went on the air about 3 elements of data that are important to you: data standards, metadata, data quality frameworks. What are those? How are they relevant to your modernization effort?
Well, data quality is important. If you don't have good data quality, none of it really matters. So data quality is really one of the most important elements of that. So we look at multiple data sets, triangulate data sets to see if we come up with the same answer when we have the same question. And when you don't, there could be an issue. It could be an issue of data quality, it might be an issue of how you query the data sets, might be an issue of how you define terms, your assumptions. So looking at that. And the metadata is very important with our data sharing. We have a lot of agreements that are being shared across the department. And the metadata will help us understand sort of the nature of some of those sharing agreements. What are in those agreements? What's the story behind the totality of those agreements? So the metadata, data about data, so to speak, is really what we're looking for to kind of get a better understanding of what we really have.
And I imagine that also helps the individual bureaus understand what the other bureaus have to determine what might help them that maybe they didn't know existed until now.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have, within Treasury, we have, each bureau has its own chief data officer. And then we have the chief data officer at where I am. So there's a lot of ways we can draw together and better understand who's doing what. So we've created an enterprise data council of all the CDOs. So we meet regularly to say, hey, what are you doing? And how can we better interact and better connect our data sets and better really learn from each other what works and what doesn't work.
Have you started to see fruits from those council meetings already?
Yes. People, they know each other much better. They know who's doing what, and they get a better sense of how the data that they're using, maybe we could learn from others about how to analyze data, particularly in things like using AI. There's different levels of interest there and different levels of applicability. And so getting a sense of who's doing what really is going to help us leverage that tool more in an enterprise way.
How are you looking at AI, and how are you encouraging the CDOs, the bureaus, to look at AI as a tool to solve a problem rather than as a shiny thing that would be cool to implement, may not necessarily be the solution to the problem?
Yeah, the shiny object is an issue, and I think one of the challenges is what do we do with the information? So one of the problems with AI, or challenges really with AI, is it's so far ahead of us on a daily basis. I mean, we're sitting here talking, we're already behind in some ways in where AI has moved. So we're really trying to develop use cases, how we can actually use it and put guardrails around it. We do want to use it. Of course, we're going to be cautious about how it's being used, but there are a lot of different ways that we can do, and lots of types of analyses you can do to better understand how we can really implement some policies to affect the Treasury work. So, for example, looking at things like the bond markets, and that's very complicated, a lot of moving parts with interest rates going up and down. How do you predict that? So many moving parts with that. Using AI to help us with things like creating what they call random forests, which is bringing together lots of decision trees to answer how all those variables interact, is a level of insight we don't really have without those kinds of tools. So use cases is really a key piece of it.
In modernization, it's easy to assume that the IT people are really important partners to you. I imagine they're not the only ones. Who are the other folks that you're working very closely with on your modernization efforts?
Well, yeah, the IT people are critical. Nothing happens without the IT folks. But also data users, data stewards. People are actually going to use the information, how they inform leadership with the information. So having a lot of data is not really good enough. We have to tell a story. So when we present dashboards and data to leadership, it's not just here's what we found. We need to also include the so what and the now what. What do we expect leaders to do with this information? How is their value add? So incorporating data stewards and how they actually create, manage, and send data to senior leaders, that's really, they're really critical partners in all this.
That's not the first time I've heard people say we sometimes might lose track of the reason we're doing all of this. It's not to have these tools in place. It's to help those data stewards actually do their jobs better, be able to deliver better whatever the mission is of the agency at hand.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, senior leaders, the secretary is expecting folks to bring to him data and analysis. He's not really sitting there necessarily, running spreadsheets himself in the way that we would as data stewards. So he really expects his folks to bring to him products that are meaningful and meet the mission. So better training, this is why we have data literacy, a big campaign on that, to really help folks better manage and use data.
How do you measure these campaigns to determine whether you're getting the results from them that you want?
Well, we ask folks after action, hey, surveys, essentially, did you learn anything? What did you learn? And how are you going to use this for your work? And then go back to them later, months later, and say, well, did you use any of these tools in your work? It's really not just about a nice to have. It's really about, over time, are you actually using these tools? Are you elevating your analysis over time? Not just did you learn something in that one session. So we are getting a lot of feedback that people are using tools as they move through their work. So that's really going to be helpful for us to continue to expand the data literacy campaign.
David, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
You can read more about the Treasury Department's data efforts on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com.